Who was that one student your school banned you from talking about? Killian came back to school his senior year after spending the last 18 months in juvie for planning a school shooting. The moment he walked through the door, the entire hallway went silent. "Active shooter drill, everyone!" someone shouted, and half the students hit the floor while the others laughed. Killian just kept walking while people filmed him. By lunch, there were already 3 different TikToks of him. They found pipe bombs in his locker, my friend Alex told me. My brother was here when it happened. Said Killian had a whole hit list and escape routes. The teachers weren't subtle either. During attendance, Mr. Williams made Killian stand up and empty his backpack for random security check. When Killian pulled out a calculator in AP Physics, Mrs. Kring actually flinched. The security guard followed him between every single class. Parents had already started a petition to remove him, which had 800 signatures by second period. But I started noticing things that didn't add up. Killian left granola bars on the desk of this kid whose parents couldn't afford lunch money. When some sophomores were destroying a special needs kid's art project, Killian stepped between them. He tutored ESL students after school in the library. He carried tampons in his backpack because the school never restocked the bathrooms. Girls would slip him notes, he'd slip them back supplies, but nobody ever thanked him. They just took what they needed and went back to posting about how much of a monster he was. It all shifted the day I stayed late for drama rehearsal. It was 6 p.m. School was empty except for theater kids in the auditorium. I went out the back exit for fresh air and saw Mr. Rayner, our AP history teacher, walking with Lacey, a freshman from my bus. They were heading toward the parking lot, and something about how she was walking, shoulders hunched, arms wrapped around herself, made my stomach twist. I caught up to them and hid behind the bushes to listen. "You needs extra tutoring at my house," I heard Mr. Rayner tell her. "Your grades really need special attention." Lacey looked terrified. "I should call my mom. I already told her you'd be staying late for academic help." His hand was on her lower back, pushing her toward his car. She was thrilled you're getting personal assistance. I was about to pull out my phone, but that's when Killian appeared from behind the dumpsters. "Lacey, your mom's here to pick you up," he said calmly. "She's in the front lot." Mr. Rayner's face went dark. "Mr. Killian, Lacey's with me. We have a scheduled session." "No, you don't." Killian stepped between them. "Lacey, go to the front. Your mom's in the blue Honda." Lacey ran. She goddamn sprinted. Mr. Rayner grabbed Killian's shoulder. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. I've been helping struggling students for 15 years. Private tutoring, academic support. Principal Davies knows all about my methods." "I know exactly what your methods are," Killian said. "I've been documenting them for 2 years." "You?" Rayner laughed. "The school shooter? Who's going to believe you?" He walked away, which is when I finally stepped out. The next day, Killian and I went to Principal Davies. We told him everything we saw, but he leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Mr. Rayner is our most decorated teacher, 30-year veteran, coach of the year. His private tutoring has helped hundreds of struggling students." He looked at Killian. "You're a convicted criminal who planned to murder children, and now you're stalking our best teacher?" Then he turned to me. "And you're believing a school shooter over a man who's shaped young minds for decades? I think you both need psychological evaluation." He picked up his phone. "Security? I need Killian escorted off campus. He's having delusions again." Killian stood up slowly. "How many kids, Davies? How many kids did you send to his house knowing what he was? Get out before I call your parole officer." That night, someone posted AI-generated photos of Killian with guns. They looked real. The petition hit 2,000 signatures. His parole officer showed up at his house. Parents demanded he be transferred to alternative school. The school board met in an emergency session. A few days later, I randomly found Killian crying at a park outside of school. I went over and sat beside him. "You're the only one who believes me," he sobbed into my shoulder. "You need to know why I actually spent 18 months in juvie?" He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of a young girl, maybe 12. Same eyes as him. My sister Lily. Mr. Rayner brought her to his house for tutoring 3 years ago. She never told anyone until, his voice broke, until she couldn't take it anymore. She's gone. And Davies knew. He knew and kept sending kids there. "What?" My eyes widened. "It's all here." He handed me his phone. That's when I saw it. The weapons in his locker? Those were recording devices. His hit list? Names of Mr. Rayner's victims. The escape routes? Maps showing how he got kids to his car without cameras seeing. I stared blankly, while Killian looked at me with hollow eyes. Rayner has Lacey's address. He'll try again. I scrolled through every single file on his phone, each one more damning than the last. Killian wiped his face with his sleeve and said his parole officer checks in tomorrow morning, and any trouble could send him straight back to juvie. We both knew we had to move fast to protect Lacey before Rayner tried again. I told him we should meet at the school super early, before anyone else got there, to figure out our next move. He nodded, and we agreed on 6 a.m. at the side entrance by the library. That night I barely slept, just kept thinking about those photos and documents on his phone, about his sister Lily, about Lacey walking toward Rayner's car. My alarm went off at 5:30, and I threw on clothes and drove to the school in the dark. The parking lot was empty except for one car, and when I pushed through the library doors, I found Killian already there with stacks of papers spread across 3 tables. He was feeding documents into the printer, his hands shaking as he organized everything into color-coded folders. He showed me victim statements he'd collected over 3 years, photos of Rainer with different students at his house that he'd gotten from social media, documented patterns of which kids Rainer targeted, and when. The evidence was overwhelming, and seeing it all laid out like that made me feel sick. Killian explained he'd been building this case since before his sister died, trying to find enough proof to stop Rainer, but nobody would listen to a troubled kid with behavior issues. We decided our first priority was warning Lacey directly during her free period, which we knew was 3rd period, because I'd seen her schedule when she dropped it in the hallway once. The morning dragged until finally 3rd period came, and we found her sitting alone in the cafeteria, picking at a sandwich she wasn't eating. She went completely pale when Killian sat down across from her, her whole body tensing like she was about to run. I sat next to her quickly and told her we weren't trying to scare her, we were trying to help, that we knew about Rainer and we wanted to keep her safe. Her eyes filled with tears, and she started shaking, then pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. She showed us message after message from Rainer, all from last night and this morning, demanding she come for mandatory tutoring at his house tonight, saying her grades depended on it, that her parents had already agreed. Killian took her phone and started screenshotting everything while I put my arm around her shoulders, feeling how badly she was shaking. She kept saying she didn't know what to do, that her parents thought Rainer was helping her, that they'd be mad if she refused the tutoring. We walked her to her next class together, staying close on either side of her like bodyguards. I slipped her a piece of paper with my phone number written on it and told her to text me immediately if Rainer came near her, if he tried to talk to her, if anything felt wrong. Killian hung back after she went into the classroom, positioning himself where he could see the door, but not be obvious about it. The security guard who always followed him noticed and started watching more closely, moving closer to where Killian stood. I could see the guard talking into his radio, probably reporting Killian's location like he always did. At lunch, I found Alex sitting with his usual group, all of them scrolling through their phones and laughing at something. I walked up and told him I needed to talk to him about something important, something about Killian that he needed to know. He looked up and laughed, said I was brainwashed by a psycho, that I'd lost my mind believing anything that future school shooter said. His friends all had their phones out, filming our conversation, probably hoping for drama they could post online. I tried to explain, but Alex just kept laughing, kept saying I was an idiot, that Killian had me fooled. More people started filming us and I gave up, walking away while they all laughed behind me. My phone buzzed with a text from Killian saying Rainer had just pulled Lacey out of class for academic counseling, that they were heading to his classroom. I ran through the hallways, dodging other students, my sneakers squeaking on the floor. Killian was already at Rainer's door when I got there, and we could both hear Rainer's voice through the wood, telling Lacey her grades were unacceptable, that she needed to cooperate if she wanted to pass his class. I pulled out my phone and started recording while Killian knocked hard on the door, 3 loud bangs that echoed down the empty hallway. The door flew open, and Rainer stood there furious, his face red, but then he saw my phone pointed at him, and his expression changed completely. Lacey bolted out of the room immediately, running past us down the hall without looking back. Killian stepped forward and told Rainer we had everything documented, every victim, every pattern, 3 years of evidence. Rainer grabbed Killian's shirt with both hands, pulling him close, and said he was calling Killian's parole officer right now for harassment, for stalking, for threatening a teacher. That's when Davies appeared at the end of the hallway, demanding to know what was happening, why there was shouting, why students were out of class. I tried to show him the recording on my phone, but he snatched it out of my hand, said recording staff without consent was illegal, that I'd violated state law. He told Lacey to get back to class immediately, then pointed at Killian and me and ordered us to his office right now. We followed him through the hallways while other students stared and whispered, everyone pulling out their phones to capture whatever was happening. In his office, Davies sat behind his huge desk and told me I was facing suspension for participating in Killian's delusions, for helping spread lies about respected staff members. He picked up his desk phone and called my parents, told them I'd been harassing teachers and needed to be picked up immediately. Then he turned to Killian and said his parole officer would definitely be hearing about this stalking behavior, about how he was terrorizing staff and students with his paranoid fantasies. We were both assigned detention for the rest of the week, starting immediately, and he said if we went near Rainer again, we'd both be expelled. After detention ended at 5:30, I walked to the park 3 blocks from the school where Killian was already sitting on a bench near the basketball courts. He had his phone out scrolling through files and looked up when I sat down next to him. We both knew Davies wasn't going to help, and the school system was protecting Rainer. Killian mentioned this kid Malik Chan from Computer Club who was really good with tech stuff and might be able to help us save all the evidence properly. Malik had helped recover deleted files for the yearbook committee last year when their hard drive crashed. We decided to find him tomorrow morning before first period started. I went home and spent the rest of the evening on my laptop searching for organizations that help students report abuse. Most of the websites were for colleges, but I finally found one for a local community center that had a section about helping high school students. Tamara Andrews was listed as the victim advocate, and her bio said she had 15 years of experience helping young people navigate reporting systems. Her email was right there on the contact page, so I typed out a message explaining we needed urgent help with a situation at our school. I didn't give too many details, but said it involved a teacher and the principal wasn't helping. I hit send before I could change my mind. The next morning, I got to the school early and found Malik in the computer lab working on some coding project. I showed him some of the screenshots on my phone, and his face went pale. He said he could definitely help and started explaining how he could verify timestamps and create backups that nobody could delete or alter. He pulled out a USB drive and started copying everything right there, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He set up some kind of cloud storage with encryption and said he'd work on organizing everything properly. Around noon, I got an email back from Tamara saying she could meet us after school at a coffee shop downtown. She suggested 4 o'clock and gave the address of a place near the library. I showed Killian the email during passing period, and we agreed to go together. During detention that afternoon, Davies walked through the room slowly, stopping at our desks. He made comments about how troublemakers never graduate and how colleges check disciplinary records very carefully. The other kids in detention kept whispering about Killian being dangerous, and I could feel people staring at us. One kid actually moved his desk further away from Killian, but then I remembered Lacey's scared face in that hallway and knew we were doing the right thing. After detention ended, Killian stopped at his locker and pulled out an old photo from behind his textbooks. It was a school picture of a young girl with the same dark hair and eyes as him. He told me this was Lily when she was 12, right before Rainer started tutoring her. His voice got quiet as he explained how she left a note describing everything that happened, but the police said it wasn't enough evidence without physical proof or witnesses. He said he failed to save her and couldn't let it happen to anyone else. We took the bus downtown and found the coffee shop where Tamara was already waiting at a corner table with a folder full of pamphlets. She was maybe 40, with short gray hair and kind eyes behind thick glasses. She listened to our whole story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When we finished, she pulled out pamphlets about Title IX and explained it was a federal law that required schools to investigate reports of sexual harassment and assault. She said Davies couldn't just ignore it if we filed a formal complaint with the district. She offered to help us write everything up properly and submit it through the right channels. She gave us her business card and said to call her cell phone anytime. When I got home that night, my parents were waiting in the living room with serious faces. They said Davies had called them about my behavior, and they were worried about my college applications being affected. My mom said she didn't want me spending time with a kid who planned a school shooting. I tried to explain what was really happening, but my dad cut me off and said I wasn't allowed to see Killian outside of school anymore. They took my car keys and said they'd be driving me to and from the school for the next 2 weeks. The next day at lunch, I told my friends I had to go to the library to work on a project, but really snuck down to the computer lab where Malik was waiting. He had been working all night and discovered something huge. The AI photos of Killian with guns had metadata showing they were created on a school computer after hours using editing software. The login information traced back to a staff account that had access to the computer lab. He showed me the technical details on his screen, explaining how the timestamp proved the photos were made days after the incident with Lacey. He had already backed up all this information in 3 different places. After school, Tamara met us again and walked us through the whole Title IX process step by step. She explained that once we filed the complaint, the district had to investigate within 60 days, regardless of what Davies wanted. She helped us write out everything in clear language with dates and times and witness names. We spent 2 hours getting every detail documented properly. She made copies of everything and said she'd submit it to the district office herself tomorrow morning. Before we left, Malik showed us this app he had installed on our phones that encrypted our messages, so the school couldn't monitor our conversations. He gave us each a different access code for the cloud storage where he'd backed up all the evidence. He explained how to retrieve everything if something happened to the original files. His tech skills made me feel like we finally had a real chance to protect the evidence and get justice. My phone buzzed at 9 p.m. that night with texts from Lacey coming in rapid fire. She was typing so fast that half the messages had typos, but I could tell she was panicking bad. Rainer had shown up at her house 20 minutes ago, telling her mom that Lacey was failing his class and needed immediate help. Her mom had actually opened the door and was about to let him inside when Lacey heard his voice from upstairs. She ran into her room and locked the door while her mom kept calling for her to come down and be polite. I told her to call Tamara right away and gave her the number while texting Killian about what was happening. Lacey sent me a photo through her bedroom window showing Rainer's car still parked outside her house. He stayed there for another 15 minutes before finally driving away when her dad came home from work. The next morning, Tamara met us at 7:30 before school started to help us get everything ready. We drove to the district office downtown, where Una-Jo worked as the Title IX coordinator for the whole district. The building was this big gray box with metal detectors at the entrance and security guards checking IDs. Una's office was on the third floor at the end of a long hallway filled with filing cabinets and copy machines. She was younger than I expected, with short black hair and glasses that kept sliding down her nose. We spent 2 hours in her office going through every piece of evidence that Killian had collected over 3 years. She took notes on everything and made copies of all the documents while asking us specific questions about dates and times. When we showed her the messages Raynor sent to Lacey, she immediately picked up her phone and started typing something. She printed out an official no-contact directive right there and said she would deliver it to the school within the hour. She told us the investigation would start immediately and gave us each her direct phone number in case anything else happened. Walking back into school after filing that complaint felt different because now it was official and real. Davies must have found out fast because by third period, I got called to his office for being 30 seconds late to English. He gave me detention for the rest of the week and said tardiness was becoming a serious problem with my attendance. The next day, he wrote me up for having my phone visible in the hallway, even though I was just checking the time. He called Killian's parole officer that afternoon, claiming he had seen Killian making gang signs in the cafeteria. Chandler showed up at the school the next morning and pulled Killian out of first period for a meeting in the counselor's office. I watched through the window as Chandler sat across from Killian with this serious look on his face. He kept pointing at me when I walked by, and I could read his lips saying something about bad influences. Killian pulled out his phone and started showing Chandler some of the evidence we had collected about Raynor. Chandler's face changed from stern to confused, and then worried as he scrolled through the documents. He handed the phone back to Killian and stood up slowly while rubbing his forehead like he had a headache. He told Killian to be careful and stay out of trouble, but didn't violate his parole or write him up. Later that day, Malik texted me that he had found something huge while going through the metadata on those AI photos. He showed me on his laptop how the images were uploaded to the school server at exactly 11:07 p.m. on a Tuesday night. The login credentials belonged to Raynor's staff account, which meant he had access to the computer lab after hours. Malik also recovered deleted emails from the server backup, showing conversations between Raynor and Davies from 6 months ago. They were talking about problem students who were causing disruptions and needed to be dealt with quietly. One email specifically mentioned Killian by name, saying he was getting too close to finding something out. The digital trail was getting clearer every day, and Malik kept finding more evidence hidden in the school's system. 3 days later, I got an email from someone named Deborah Knowles, who said she was a reporter at the local paper. She had heard rumors about our Title IX complaint through her sources at the district office. She wanted to meet with us off the record to discuss what was happening at the school. We agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown on Saturday afternoon, where no one from the school would see us. She was older with gray hair and carried this beat-up leather bag full of notebooks and recording equipment. She listened to our whole story without interrupting and took pages of notes in shorthand that I couldn't read. She said she had been investigating the school district for months after getting tips about other problems. She needed multiple sources to corroborate our story before she could publish anything but promised to keep digging. That same week, another student went to see Tamara at the community center, but wouldn't give her name. She told Tamara that Raynor had done the same thing to her 2 years ago when she was a freshman. She described the exact same pattern of offering tutoring and then trying to get her alone at his house. She had never told anyone because she was scared no one would believe her over a popular teacher. Tamara helped her write down everything she remembered and added it to our growing file of evidence. 2 days later, one of the ESL students that Killian used to tutor came to Tamara's office crying. She said Raynor had offered to help her with her visa paperwork if she came to his house for special sessions. She was terrified of being deported and almost went, but remembered what Killian had warned her about. She decided to speak up after hearing that other girls were coming forward with similar stories. The victim count kept growing every day as more students found the courage to tell their stories. I tried talking to the school counselor about everything that was happening, but she just shook her head sadly. She said her hands were tied by union rules and district protocols that prevented her from getting involved. She looked like she wanted to help, but explained that she could lose her job and pension if she spoke out. The system was designed to protect itself, and everyone inside it knew the rules about staying quiet. That weekend, my parents saw me with Killian at the park near our house when I was supposed to be at the library. They were furious and demanded to know why I was still hanging out with him after they told me not to. They said I was throwing away my future for some kid who planned to shoot up the school. They took my car keys and said I was grounded for the next month with no phone or computer except for homework. The pressure at home was getting worse every day, and I felt trapped between doing what was right and keeping my parents happy. The next morning, I went to the school early to avoid another fight with my parents about Killian. I was heading to my locker when Rainer appeared beside me in the empty hallway. He smiled that fake teacher smile while blocking my path to class. He said he'd been thinking about my college applications and wanted to write me a really strong recommendation letter. His voice was calm, but his eyes were cold when he mentioned how important senior year grades were for getting into good schools. He stepped closer and said all I had to do was stop spreading lies about him and focus on my studies like a good student should. My stomach turned as he described how he could make my transcript shine or how one bad teacher review could ruin everything I'd worked for. I mumbled something about being late and pushed past him while my hands shook. 2 days later, Killian texted me during lunch saying I needed to come to the math hallway right away. I found him crouched behind a trophy case with his phone out, recording Rainer talking to this tiny freshman girl about coming to his house for extra help. The girl kept trying to leave, but Rainer had his hand on her shoulder keeping her there while he explained how much her grades would improve with his personal attention. Killian's phone picked up every word as Rainer used the exact same lines he'd used on Lacey about special tutoring and how her parents would be so proud. The freshman finally pulled away and ran to her next class while we saved the recording to 3 different cloud accounts. That afternoon, we had another meeting with Una about the investigation, but this time, a woman in a suit showed up saying she was from the teachers' union. She kept interrupting Una to talk about due process and how accusations needed proper documentation and how union members had rights that couldn't be violated. Davies sat there nodding along while the union rep explained how these procedures could take months to complete properly. Every time Una tried to move forward, the union woman would cite some rule or policy that meant more delays and more paperwork. Killian looked ready to explode, but stayed quiet while I took notes on everything they said. 3 days passed before we got a call from Lionel Bloom, saying he wanted to meet with us privately about our concerns. We met him at a coffee shop downtown, where he listened to our whole story without interrupting once. He looked sick when we played him the recording of Rainer with the freshman, and even worse, when we showed him the evidence Killian had collected over 3 years. He promised to push for real action at the next board meeting, and gave us his personal cell number in case anything else happened. The next week, Una finally scheduled formal interviews with everyone involved, and sent out new rules saying Rainer couldn't be alone with any students while they investigated. She interviewed me for 2 hours, asking detailed questions about everything I'd seen, and making me go through the timeline over and over. She interviewed Killian separately, and then Lacey with Tamara there for support. Rainer got to keep teaching, but at least couldn't pull kids out of class anymore for his special sessions. Meanwhile, Deborah was working on her investigation and filed a bunch of paperwork with the district, asking for all of Rainer's tutoring records and emails between him and Davies. The district lawyer tried to block it, saying it was private information, but Deborah knew the law better than they did. She kept pushing and filing appeals while building her story piece by piece. Malik spent hours in the computer lab going through old-school laptops that were supposed to be wiped clean. He found a bunch of deleted messages between Rainer and Davies where they talked about certain students using weird code words. One message said a student needed extra attention for behavioral issues, but the timestamp matched when Rainer had taken that same girl to his car. Another mentioned academic intervention right before a different girl reported being touched. Malik saved everything to encrypted drives and made copies for Una and the police. The school finally changed Lacey's schedule so she didn't have any classes near Rainer's room and assigned her a buddy to walk with between periods. It was embarrassing for her having someone follow her everywhere, but she told me she could finally breathe again without worrying about running into him. Other girls started asking for schedule changes too once they heard it was possible. That weekend, I couldn't take seeing all the lies about Killian online anymore, and posted a long comment on the petition explaining what really happened. I wrote about how he was protecting students, not planning to hurt them, and how the real danger was a teacher everyone trusted. Within an hour, my inbox was full of messages calling me crazy and saying I was defending a school shooter. People screenshot my comment and shared it everywhere, saying I was a rape apologist and psycho lover. My Instagram got so many hate messages, I had to make it private. Kids at the school started whispering when I walked by, and someone wrote Psycho's girlfriend on my locker. My parents saw the posts and grounded me for another month, saying I was ruining my reputation for a criminal. Monday morning, Chandler showed up to check on Killian and review his parole requirements. But instead of threatening him like before, Chandler actually listened when Killian explained everything that was happening. He looked through Killian's evidence and checked that Killian hadn't violated any rules while investigating Rainer. He even offered to write a letter to the court supporting Killian if it would help with the case. Killian almost cried when Chandler said he believed him and was proud of him for protecting other kids. 2 days later, Tamara called me during lunch saying someone important wanted to meet with us after school. I drove to the community center and found a woman in her 20s sitting with Tamara in the conference room. She had the same scared look I'd seen on Lacey's face. The woman pulled out her phone and showed us text messages from 2019 where Rainer kept asking her to come to his house for extra help with her essays. She scrolled through dozens of messages where he got more and more pushy about needing to see her alone. Then she showed us emails where he told her parents she was failing and needed private tutoring 3 times a week. The timestamps matched perfectly with what we'd been seeing with current students. She'd saved everything for 5 years because she knew someday someone would believe her. Tamara took photos of all the evidence while the woman explained how Rainer would lock his classroom door during their sessions and make her sit right next to him. She said Davies knew because she'd tried to report it, but he told her she was misunderstanding a teacher's concern for her education. Meanwhile, Deborah was digging into Rainer's finances and found something huge. She called me that night and said she'd been tracking payments through Venmo and PayPal from parents to Rainer's personal accounts. The payments were always labeled as tutoring or academic support, but none of it was reported to the school. She'd found over $40,000 in the past 3 years that Rainer had taken without declaring it on taxes or telling the district. The amounts matched up with the times certain students had been pulled for his special help. Parents thought they were paying for real tutoring while their kids were being hurt. The next evening, Killian had to meet with a detective about the criminal case, and the interview ran way longer than expected. I was sitting in my car outside the police station watching the clock because his curfew was 9:30 and it was already 9:15. He finally ran out at 9:20 and jumped in my car. I drove like crazy through yellow lights and rolled through stop signs while Killian kept checking his phone for the time. We pulled up to his house at 9:28 and he sprinted to his door. His parole officer's car was already there doing a random check. Killian made it inside with 2 minutes left, and I sat in my car shaking from how close we'd come to ruining everything. The next morning, Una called an emergency meeting after Davies had been calling parents and telling them not to cooperate with the investigation. She brought in the district's head lawyer, who looked really mad. The lawyer told Davies that threatening witnesses was illegal and could make him personally responsible for damages. She said any more contact with families involved in the case would result in immediate suspension without pay. Davies tried to argue, but the lawyer cut him off and said the district wouldn't protect him if he kept interfering. That afternoon, my mom got home from work and found a certified letter from Davies saying I was harassing school staff and creating a hostile environment. The letter threatened legal action if I didn't stop immediately. My parents freaked out and started yelling about lawsuits and college applications. But Tamara showed up within an hour with printed copies of whistleblower protection laws. She explained to my parents that students reporting abuse are protected from retaliation, and Davies was breaking federal law by trying to silence me. She helped them write a response letter that basically told Davies to back off or face his own lawsuit. My mom finally understood this was bigger than just school drama. That Thursday, Deborah met with a custodian who'd been working at the school for 20 years. He was scared of losing his job but couldn't stay quiet anymore. He took Deborah to a storage room and pulled out a hard drive where he'd been saving security footage that was supposed to be deleted. The footage showed Rainer walking different girls to his car after school at least once a week for years. You could see him putting his hand on their backs and leading them to the parking lot. Some of the girls in the footage had graduated years ago, but the pattern was exactly the same every time. The custodian said he'd tried showing it to Davies once, but Davies made him delete it and threatened to fire him. He'd been secretly keeping copies ever since, hoping someone would eventually listen. Malik spent the whole weekend putting together everything we had into one massive timeline. He used the footage timestamps, the payment records, the text messages, and all the victim statements to show the pattern. Every single piece lined up perfectly. You could see how Rainer would target struggling students, convince their parents they needed help, take their money, and then abuse them in private. The timeline went back 8 years and included at least 30 different students. Malik made copies on encrypted drives and gave them to Tamara, Una, and Deborah. We all sat in Tamara's office looking at the evidence and realized we had to stop trying to catch Rainer doing something new. Tamara said our job was to let the system work, now that we had real proof. She reminded us that going after him ourselves would make us look like vigilantes and could ruin the whole case. It was hard to accept, but she was right. Deborah spent Monday morning calling the district office asking for official comment on her investigation. She told them she had evidence of financial fraud, abuse cover-ups, and administrative negligence. Within an hour, the superintendent's office was calling emergency meetings, and lawyers were flying in from the district headquarters. Someone leaked that the newspaper was about to run a huge story, and parents started calling the school demanding answers. Tuesday morning, we all got to the school early and saw Rainer's car in its usual spot. But during first period, an announcement came over the speakers asking him to report to the main office immediately. I watched from the hallway as 2 security officers escorted him out of the building while he kept asking what was happening. They put him in a district van and drove away while students pressed against the windows trying to see. Later that day, the district sent an email to all parents saying Rainer had been placed on paid administrative leave pending an investigation. It wasn't enough, but seeing his empty classroom felt like the first real victory we'd had. Wednesday morning, Davies called Killian to his office and started yelling about computer crimes the second we walked in. He had some IT guy there who kept pointing at printouts and talking about IP addresses and server logs. Davies kept saying Killian must have hacked into the school system to plant fake evidence against Rayner. The IT guy showed timestamps and access logs, but couldn't actually prove anything illegal happened. Malik showed up with his laptop and a folder full of papers. He pulled out this long document he'd written, explaining exactly how he got every piece of digital evidence. Screen recordings of him saving public social media posts, receipts from payment apps that were already visible to anyone who had the link, security footage the custodian gave us willingly. Everything was legal, and he had proof. Davies grabbed the papers and started reading while his face got redder and redder. The IT guy looked at Malik's documentation and told Davies there was no hacking involved. Davies crumpled up the papers and threw them in the trash. 2 days later, a detective showed up at the school after Yuna made some kind of official report to the police. He set up in the conference room and started calling students in one by one. Lacey went first with Tamara sitting beside her for support. She was in there for 2 hours. The ESL student I'd seen Killian tutoring went next. Then 3 other girls I didn't even know had been involved. Each one came out looking exhausted but relieved. The detective took notes on everything and made copies of all our evidence. He told us this was now an active criminal investigation. Monday morning, I saw 4 police cars in the school parking lot. They had a warrant for Rayner's classroom and were carrying out boxes of stuff. His laptop, his phone from his desk drawer, stacks of papers, even some framed photos from his walls. Students pressed against classroom windows, watching them load everything into evidence bags. Later, the detective called Killian and me to the station. He showed us some of what they found on Rayner's devices. Hundreds of messages to students going back years. Photos that made me want to throw up. Videos he'd secretly recorded. The detective said it was one of the worst cases he'd seen in 20 years. He thanked us for coming forward. That Thursday night, the school board held an emergency meeting in the gym. Parents packed every seat and lined the walls. Some held signs supporting Rayner, calling it a witch hunt, but most wanted answers about how this could happen for so long. Lionel stood up and demanded a full investigation by an outside agency. He wanted new policies to protect students. He wanted accountability for everyone who knew and did nothing. The crowd erupted in shouting. Davies sat at the board table looking pale while lawyers whispered in his ear. Friday afternoon, the district sent an email to every parent in the school system. They confirmed the AI photos of Killian were fake and had been created on a school computer by a staff member. They promised full cooperation with the police investigation. They announced new safety policies and mandatory training for all staff. They said Killian had been wrongly accused and the district apologized for the harm caused. My phone blew up with texts from classmates who'd been posting about Killian being dangerous. Chandler came to Killian's house that weekend with a stack of paperwork. He updated Killian's file to show he'd been protecting students, not threatening them. He removed every single violation warning from the record. Then he pulled out a letter he'd written to the court recommending they end Killian's parole early. He said Killian showed more courage than most adults would have. Killian read the letter 3 times before breaking down completely. Chandler just sat there and let him cry. The following Monday felt different at the school. Davies wasn't in his office. An email went out saying he'd been placed on administrative leave while investigators looked into what he knew about Rayner. Teachers who'd been scared to speak up started talking more openly. The counselor pulled me aside and apologized for not being able to help earlier. She said Davies had threatened to fire anyone who questioned Rayner. Without him there, people finally felt safe to tell the truth. Over the next 2 weeks, Killian spent hours at the prosecutor's office giving testimony. They had him go through every piece of evidence he'd collected over 3 years. Every recording, every photo, every witness statement. The prosecutor said Killian's documentation was the strongest evidence they had. She said most cases like this fall apart because there's no proof, but Killian had built an airtight case. She mentioned Lily's name and said they might finally get justice for her too. Meanwhile, Lacey's parents hired a lawyer and got a restraining order against Rayner. The school assigned a security officer to walk her between classes. They changed her schedule so she wouldn't have to pass by Rayner's old classroom. She started seeing a counselor twice a week. Her mom told my mom that Lacey had nightmares every night, but was slowly getting better. She said Lacey kept saying that speaking up had saved other girls from going through the same thing. 3 weeks after the investigation started, I was eating breakfast when my mom showed me her phone. Rayner's mugshot was on the front page of the news app. Multiple charges including sexual abuse of minors and witness intimidation. The article said he'd been arrested at his house at 6 in the morning. Comments were already pouring in with people taking sides. Some called him a monster while others said he was framed. But the survivors knew the truth, and that's what mattered. The district moved fast after that. Within a week, they brought in outside trainers to teach every single teacher and staff member about mandatory reporting laws. I sat in the back of the auditorium watching them explain how to recognize warning signs and where to report concerns without going through administration first. They set up anonymous tip boxes in every hallway and created a hotline that went straight to the district office. Teachers got assigned as safe contacts with their photos posted in every classroom. Mrs. Peterson from English volunteered to be one, and I saw her wipe tears when they explained what happened with Lily. My mom called me that night and said she was sorry for not believing me. She'd read Deborah's first article that morning and couldn't stop crying. Dad got on the phone too and said he was proud of me for standing up for what was right. We talked for 2 hours about everything that happened. Alex texted me the next day with just, "I was wrong about Killian," and nothing else. I texted back that it was okay, and he sent a thumbs up emoji. The school board approved Killian for hybrid learning so he could finish senior year without dealing with the hallways full of people staring. He'd come in for labs and important tests, but could do most coursework from home. When I helped him move his stuff from his locker, he actually smiled for the first time in weeks. Deborah's 3-part investigation came out over the next month, and each article got worse than the last. She had testimony from 12 different victims going back 15 years. She showed how Davies had destroyed reports and threatened teachers who tried to speak up. The state education department launched their own investigation after her articles won some journalism award. They made new rules about background checks and supervision that every school in the state had to follow. Tamara helped organize a memorial fund in Lily's name to support other survivors and pay for counseling. The launch event was at the community center, and Killian stood up front talking about his sister. His voice stayed steady as he explained how she loved painting and wanted to be a teacher. He said the fund would make sure no other family went through what his did. Over 300 people showed up, and they raised $40,000 that first night. The Title IX investigation took 3 months, but when the results came out, Davies was done. They found evidence of him covering up complaints about 3 other teachers over the years. He got fired immediately and lost his entire pension. 2 assistant principals resigned the same day, and the superintendent announced a complete restructuring of the administration. One Sunday afternoon in May, Killian asked if I'd go somewhere with him. We drove to the cemetery on the edge of town and walked to a small headstone under an oak tree. Lily's name was carved in simple letters with dates that showed she was only 14 when she died. Killian knelt down and cleaned some leaves off the stone. He told her that Rayner was going to prison, and Davies was gone, and things were finally changing. He thanked me for believing him when nobody else would. I thanked him for being brave enough to keep fighting, even when everyone thought he was a monster. We stood there for a long time, not saying anything while the wind moved through the trees. Graduation came faster than expected. When they called Killian's name to get his diploma, something amazing happened. People actually clapped. Not everyone, but enough that you could hear it clearly. He walked across that stage with his head up for the first time all year. After the ceremony, he told me he got into the State University's social work program. He wanted to help kids who'd been through trauma like his sister. We still text sometimes, checking in on each other. He sends me articles about policy changes, and I tell him about my classes. Neither of us talks much about that year, but we both know it changed us. He's doing his internship at a crisis center now, and says he finally feels like he's making a difference. I'm studying journalism because of what Deborah showed me about the power of telling the truth. Sometimes late at night, I think about Lily and all the other kids Rayner hurt. I think about how many people knew and stayed quiet. But mostly, I think about Killian walking those hallways with everyone hating him while he tried to save other kids from what happened to his sister. That kind of courage stays with you forever. Thanks for letting me question things right alongside you. It's been a ride just wondering together. Until next time, take care out there. Like the video, it helps more than you think.